Hello everyone and welcome to Dark Aspects, where I analyze a more adult side of Nintendo games. In the last video of this series I reviewed Color Splash, but now I'm going back in time as I'd like to announce one video for each game of the original Paper Mario trilogy. The first of this line of amazing games is Paper Mario on the N64, and it's my favorite in the series. Why not the fan favorite Thousand Year Door? That's a video for another time. We're here today to search under the radar and uncover the more mature themes this game presents. Chapter 3, the invincible Tubba Blubba, seems like it'd be a go-to section of the game for this sort of thing, but in actuality it starts off quite silly. Trekking through the Forever Forest certainly has a genuinely scary feel to it, though the Boo's Mansion is just a fun little classic haunted house that doesn't bode well in the realm of terror. The real creepy side of this chapter shines later when the threat is discovered. Tubba Blubba is a towering beast that eats Boo's whole, which is frightening in itself because 1, it feasts on language-capable creatures, and 2, the monster completely swallows them face first. This story arc is appealing in mystery from the beginning, as the only way to beat him is to locate and defeat Tubba's heart. That's right, Mr. Blubba himself is simply a towering husk of an enemy, a puppet to the brains, or heart in this case, of the operation. When you realize that bandaged patch on his chest is where his heart is supposed to be, it's disturbing to think about how exactly it became separated in the first place. It's true that magic exists in the game's universe, and it could have been teleported out via Magic Koopa spell, but that doesn't explain any wound that needs covering. Was this a surgical procedure then? Considering Bowser is stated to be the one that made him invincible, we can probably assume it wasn't done in a clean way. As shocking as that might sound, regardless, having to sneak around and run from this giant puppet's chambers until its weakness is uncovered is one of the less tame events this game offers. I'd like to move focus quite a ways into the game from this point and discuss a segment of Chapter 6. In this chapter, the player gains access to a world in which every friendly character is a type of plant, meaning they all need the 3 types of basic nutrients: water, soil, and sunshine. Thankfully, the flowers can thrive here normally, but are missing the 3rd major ingredient to their livelihood, that being the sun itself. Now, the reason the sun is missing is quite comical, as it's simply Bowser's minions meddling with a cloud generating machine, but seeing the dejected and hopeless floral residents is quite sad. Mario can help each one out to make the situation a bit better, but none of them are truly happy until their star rises again. The situation becomes even more dire when the player actually meets the sun before destroying the Puff Puff machine, where a reflective tower climb invokes feelings of melancholy with this background theme. At the end of that chapter, Mario faces off against Huff and Puff himself, a sentient cloud that can break apart into Tough Puffs, creatures of his own species that he's willing to swallow up to restore health. After reviving our new friend and ridding the heavenly fields of an evil overcast, the penultimate chapter is granted access. So just what aspects lurk in a Star Spirit on Ice? Well, perhaps most obvious involves acquiring the Mayor of Shiver City's permission to progress. Unfortunately though, the mayor was supposedly murdered. The mayor's wife walks into the room upon Mario discovering his body and irrefutably believes our protagonist to be the cause. After dragging an investigator into this crime scene, Mario is accused but given the chance to prove himself innocent with evidence. This leads to a penguin murder mystery and sees the hero getting help from fictional horror writer Herringway to make sense of the commotion. Ultimately though, the fuss ends with the mayor simply waking up from his blackout, stating it's his fault and that his head was hit while reaching for a gift. While this was all built up for a joke, the humor comes from how shocking the situation was, everywhere from an actual killing to false accusations of a culprit. I want to also stress that until the punchline, players are left to believe he's dead, and that someone actually took this character's life in a Mario game, not poofed away, canonically killed off. Alright, calming down a little bit, but also in this chapter is the Ice Palace Mario must explore. Progressing past the Bitter Mountain region leads the player to a lonely place, the Crystal Palace. This is revealed to have been a shrine to the star spirits Mario's been rescuing on his quest, so it's inherently off-putting as its history's been deserted. The music, Crystal Palace Crawl, is a tad unsettling to match the empty atmosphere. The Dupligos work to add to this dissonance when they pose as your friends. Other would-be enemies unique to this area are the albino dinos, completely harmless but somewhat creepy as these seemingly illusionary creatures are actually living guards for the palace. They strangely only move when interacted with too, and serve solely as a roadblock to puzzle intruders. To wrap up these chapter segments, this isn't necessarily dark, though I feel it's worth mentioning this iteration of Bowser's built to be a formidable villain. In games where the final boss is a one-on-one traditional Bowser vs Mario fight, that means no gimmicks like Dark Bowser, a team-up, or his being possessed, this is one of the best. This contrasts to Thousand Year Door, Super Paper Mario, and the earlier Mario & Luigi games in which he is utilized for comic relief. While he is still dim-witted and used for humor here as the tail end of jokes, he is capable, and moments like his castle first rising from below Peach's was genuinely intimidating to see for the first time. While it's now a known trope, it works to have Mario lose at the beginning because it's something players hardly ever get to see from this franchise. Bowser, written to have remembered his previous losses from Mario, comes out on top and actually believes he'll prevail this time with a solid plan. Of course, he's stomped as per usual, but it was an effort by the devs to make him less foolish in a Mario role-playing game. The only other enemies I'd consider frightening would be the black-cloaked anti-guys, a variant of Shy Guy more powerful than even their commander, General Guy. They're one of the strongest non-boss enemies in the game, made especially scary by fact that if you lose the quiz held in Bowser's castle, Mario's pitted against a trio of them called the Anti-Guy Unit. To finish off in a lighter way, and look at the game as a whole, let's discuss some of the sexual references that make their way into this E-rated game. As part of a chain of side quests revolving around completing favors for the old man Koopa Koot, the third task is to retrieve a borrowed tape from Goomba in Goomba Village. Just what's on the tape? It's never stated, but it's clear the contents aren't something either party wants to make obvious. Koopa Koot makes Mario promise to keep the ordeal under wraps, and Goomba becomes noticeably flustered when asked, admitting he can't reveal that information at the moment, probably because his wife is there, and it's porn. It was great though. Similarly, there's a scene at the end of Chapter 3 during the Peach interlude. It involves a nervous Hammer Bro asking what the player is looking at, and that he isn't searching for the book you think he's looking for. After a haphazard excuse, he gives the player a shooting star item to essentially bribe them into leaving. And that's all I have for the original Paper Mario. Next time I'll be discussing the much edgier Thousand Year Door with things like drug and gang war undertones. Hello everyone! This is episode 9 of Dark Aspects and part 2 of my analysis for the original Paper Mario series. Today I'll be discussing the more adult content of Thousand Year Door, a game that, like I mentioned in the first video, hosts a literal gallows in the center of the hub world. Welcome to Rogueport, a run-down, crime-centered city where it really isn't out of place to think it was used for lynching at one point in time. To start off, and speaking of crime-ridden, let's discuss violence and drug implications as early as the beginning of the game. Rogueport is a town that sees Piantas from Super Mario Sunshine return, though unlike the paradise that was Isle Delfino, the few that find homes here are part of a Yakuza, mobster or mafia outside of Japan, crime ring known as the Pianta Syndicate. They are located at the west part of the city, while the lowly rivaling organization Robo Gang, composed of a species called Craw, are based at the east side. The Pianta Syndicate is comparable to the real-world Sicilian Mafia, also known as the Italian Mob or simply the Mafia, evidenced by the Italian names, the title Don Pianta, their gambling nature, and the fact that all members are considered family, with the grandfather taking lead. This leader also goes by the name Don of Untimely Death. The names for Don Pianta in other languages too are based around the combination of infamous Al Capone with the Godfather films Don Corleone, give me justice. Their outfits are also clearly mobster with a black suit fedora sunglasses combo, albeit made hilarious with a signature Pianta hula skirt. Silliness in appearance aside, these gang wars are violent, as shown early on during Goombella's introduction, and the fact that there are staked skulls on both territories of Rogueport. This act of human head spiking is seen in media often as warnings for trespassers, an authority symbol, or trophies of war, and stems in inspiration from real-world examples throughout human history. Speaking of historical practice, the European version of the game removed one of two interaction animations for Mario, that being his raising an arm up in the air. This was obviously not the intention, but it bared enough resemblance to the Nazi salute to be taken out by the localization team, and that is at least worth mentioning. To wrap up violence implications, there is a heavily implied murder scene left in the Japanese release. While just a messy shed internationally, this uncensored version features a chalk outline of what looks like a toad, complete with a pool of blood. I also mentioned in the last video a side quest involving the transfer of a quite probably pornographic tape. The theme of Mario not knowing what content he's delivering finds its way here again, though this time a package finds its way to the back alley of Rogueport. It's most likely drugs. Finally, moving away from the hub area of the game though, the first instance of another dark aspect is in the very first chapter, the dragon boss that's been terrorizing the neighboring town. In the original Paper Mario, there were two boss encounters involving eating another smaller, sentient being. Tubba Blubba swallows down ghosts, and Huff and Puff eats his own followers to regain health. Similarly, but more horrifying, Hooktail in this game eats the crowd. The audience that watches Mario fight and participates by throwing items or cheering. Yeah, and unlike the first game, in Tubba's case where the boos were shown to be spit out alive and well after his defeat, Hooktail doesn't show any indication of her prey being okay at the end of the battle. The only living creature she coughs up is Coop's dad, after all. With this knowledge, we can assume Coop's dad was swallowed whole, but the toads, they were completely mowed on. You could argue that Tubba Blubba makes a similar animation that looks as if he's chewing, but since the boos were okay, perhaps he was just savoring the flavor with his lips. That's his default animation after all. Anyway, no one here was spit back up, so my presumption has to be that they're dead. Regardless, consuming a live crowd to replenish health is terrifying. Later on in the game, Cortez the Pirate King utilizes a similar move in his battle, though instead of eating crowd members, he absorbs their souls. How horrific. I don't know about you, but all this talk of death is putting me in a mood. To kick off sexual references, let's not stray far away from Hooktail, as she very oddly takes a chance at bribing Mario into indulging in a fetish. You heard that right, the dragon seriously offers a foot-smelling session, and insists that people pay good money for this. Yes, it's as shocking as it sounds, and the player will fittingly get the option to say, "That's disgusting." Thankfully, even if you accept, she'll simply attack by biting Mario. If only it was a foot stomp like you sick people wanted. Moving on to a more normal sensuality, Princess Peach in this game is actually naked on two separate occasions, with option for more if the player desires. One of these situations is required by the story, and occurs when the princess needs to become invisible in order to successfully sneak around the base she's being held captive. The potion the player concocts has to be consumed in order to work, so one probably can't just rub it on themselves, which means only her body and not clothes are unseeable. To avoid being caught as a phantom dress, she disrobes and waltz around the fortress completely nude. We can't see her, of course, but the fact that she's undressed is somewhat of a perverse move from the developers. It's comical and maybe that's why it was chosen, sure, but it seems like the combination of this and the fact that the player can make her take a shower at every chapter interval was for the other reason. Add in the X-Naught supercomputer, TEC, and it's falling in love with her being a subplot, and we're left to speculate whether or not it can spy on her via the cameras throughout the building. Back in Rogueport, during one of Frankly's long-winded speeches, he begins with the common phrase, assuming we'll just make, but stops himself and simply assures Mario that he knows the saying already. Assuming we'll just make an ass out of you and me is what's being referenced, to which Flurry comments, oh yes, how inappropriate. Speaking of Madame Flurry, I've commented on her before in another video, but wow. Her design, being a wind spirit, reveals a voluptuous body with nothing but a necklace covering her bosom. Mario needs to grab hold of her in order for her to blow. Yep, you've got the idea. To quote Nintendo Power magazine, we're not touching that one with a 10-foot pole. It's also mentioned that Flurry squashes enemies with her stage presence. Her lip lock attack is even called Sexy Kiss in the Japanese version. Another case of innuendo involving Goombella is in Chapter 2 during the hero's entrapment in a cage. If you happen to tattle on Puniper and only hear, Goombella will say, that's Puniper of the Punies. He's a little bigger than the others, obviously, so maybe he can help us reach that special spot. Hee, just kidding. Speaking of, if Goombella's the active party member during the Miss Mouse cutscenes in which she flirts with Mario, the Goomba will occasionally call her a floozy. This also works if tattling the area, as she'll say Miss Mouse was here before, but I think she took the next train to Floozyville. Floozy, while once a more offensive term, is used to describe a woman as being overly promiscuous. To top off Goombella's suggestive dialogue, when tattling on a fuzzy, she comments as a closing thought, these things really suck, ... HP. Two more unrelated bits of dialogue sneaking in dirty terms are 1. A babam referring to businessmen as brown-nosers, guess where that slang comes from, and 2. Kammy Koopa saying why, even at my age, I was shaking what my mama gave me, when describing Glitzville to Bowser. Additionally, in the Japanese version of the game, Pika the Boo is wearing bunny ears rather than cat ears. It was likely censored or removed to dispel any resemblance to the copyrighted Playboy bunny outfit. Speaking of degrading women, one of the black chest demons that give Mario helpful curses throughout the quest also asks if he had expected a lovely lady to pop out instead. Finally, or not finally, if you really like this, to end sexual themes, there's this scene, which involves the shocked wife of the Twilight Town shopkeeper. Her husband is turned into a pig, though upon returning after that curse has been broken, you'll find not her husband, but another man. Not only that, but he's the handsome, flirty Frenchman Dupree that appears frequently throughout the game. Her real husband thinks there was some unfaithfulness going on when he walks in, and the two fight, while the wife comments on how she should trade him in since Dupree is younger and cuter. That's it for sex, but we're not done in general, so let's now continue on about the game overall. Starting off small, we have a pretty surprising revelation from one of Luigi's own tales. You can hear about it through the man himself, or the Super Luigi series of books, available for purchase after completion of Chapter 8. Upon arriving in the fabled Plump Belly village, Luigi's greeted with a two-headed serpent forcing the town's maidens to be sacrificed. That's right, mention of human sacrifice in a Mario game. The mayor's daughter is next in line to be offered up, but Luigi halts the ceremony by donning a bridal gown to take her place, getting closer to, and ultimately defeating the beast known as Hizza. This isn't the only trick Luigi pulls to best the creature, as he's able to win the fight by making Hizza eat itself. Another rather dark tidbit from Luigi's adventure comes from Volume 4, documenting his trek through the Rapturous Ruins. It's nothing particularly special, but the described emptiness of this place lost in time, and his meeting the only surviving member of an ancient land is quite eerie. Not to mention, that survivor is just a boy, one that completely fades from existence after their conversation. Moving on and backtracking a bit to Chapter 3, we have my favorite section of the game, of Glitz and Glory. In quite the change up to the game's standard chapter format, formula, the third crystal star that Mario has to collect is a prize this time, attached to the champion's belt for the #1 fighter in an arena-style wrestling pit. Or so we thought. As Mario joins the ring and ascends its ranks, the plot starts to make clear how corrupt the organization is as mysteries begin unfolding. Prince Mush was the original champion of the pit before vanishing without a trace, with Rockhawk currently, before Mario intervenes, taking his place. Many fans of the Glitz Pit loved Prince Mush and wonder why he's disappeared so suddenly. It's only until later that we learn it wasn't by choice, as Grubba, founder and promoter of the pit, actually sapped the fighter's powers with energy from the real crystal star, entrapping him in a machine beneath the arena stage. Grubba did this because Mush found out about his power-enhancing secret. Meanwhile, Jolene, Grubba's secretary, is the sister of Mush and started working at the pit to try and uncover what really happened to her sibling. It's also learned that Jolene was the one privately messaging Mario about the dangers of the arena, using the name X and leaving clues that reveal the truth about Grubba. Being directed by this unknown person to gradually unearth these secrets is a little frightening, and honestly, by association, after hearing the email notification, which is the Super Mario Bros. 3 Ice World theme by the way, is genuinely spooky and it can catch you off guard. Pair this with the randomly capitalized text based on ransom notes, and you've got some fairly diseasing plot progression. The implications of what else Grubba does is intimidating too, because we see firsthand, for example, a couple of collapsed fighters that did a little too much investigating. Overall, nothing major, but the chapter can certainly provide a bit of a chilling experience. After the gold star is claimed and Jolene takes over Grubba's position, we're led to the depressing Twilight Town, and even though it's more in line with cliché horror in the case of Creepy Steeple, the introductory town is really in a dire state. Everywhere from the color tone consisting of deep red, brown, and purple hues, to the inhabitants, Twilighters, themselves being animated dolls with shadows covering half their faces. Combined with genuinely unnerving background music, the atmosphere is much more grim than most of Mario's takes on the genre. In addition to this, the plot for Chapter 4, For Pigs the Bell Tolls, oh, another Hemingway reference, is quite disturbing as it involves the residents unwillingly being transformed into pigs every time the steeple's bell rings. While this is scary in concept, the script even considers the more practical side of how it'd be scary. That is to say, how the townspeople's lives are being directly affected. For example, one mother of 3 children mentions her husband turning into a pig, and because of this the family has no source of income and is hungry. If the player is kind enough to give them food, the mom will transform too, right in front of all her kids. Obviously this is traumatic, but one kid surprisingly asks if pigs are good eaten. You can give them a hot dog. So that's dark for entirely different reasons. Anyway, when even the gatekeeper is turned into a little oink, Mario makes his way past to the top of the church and directly to the boss's lair, where it's learned a Duplighost is responsible for the chapter's events. After a supposed victory against the Mimic, the player takes control of a shadowed Mario instead of Peach for the usual post-chapter intermission. Now this species of enemy has always had the ability to shapeshift into whoever it wants, but this particular Duplighost has a special power to completely steal identities. The boss takes our hero's name and body for his own, and will only give them back to Mario if his real name is spoken, Dupless. It's quite disturbing to imagine something possessing and using your own body, but in this case it's kind of terrifying watching Mario be inhabited, since the normally happy-go-lucky figure is now menacingly hunched over, sporting empty, unblinking, hollowed black eyes. You won't see Mario like this in any other game. After Mario takes back his identity and reunites with his confused allies, the game continues on and requires the crew to head towards a cursed island. In order to cross the ocean and make it there though, the player will need help from the only known sailor living in Rogueport, Admiral Bobbery, a retired ship captain. And it's not easy getting him to agree, as it's learned the reason for his retirement was because his wife Scarlet had become severely ill when he was away, and was dead upon his return. In quite possibly the saddest exchange we've seen in a Mario game, an emotionally tormented Bobbery must read his deceased wife's letters to convince him to sail out for the first time since the incident. It's a powerful display of storytelling, and honestly an example of how inclusion of darker aspects in family-oriented media can be a good thing. In my opinion, when executed correctly, children should be exposed to this heavy development, as like real life, hardship and trauma will come unexpectedly, and hit even harder if they aren't told through respectable, careful means. Moving away from the more weighty subjects though, let's discuss something a bit sillier. In the next chapter, while traveling to Poshley Heights on board the XS Express, the player must interact with the ghost of a toad, humorously and fittingly named Ghost T. This has reason for dark aspects because he is a canonically deceased toad that passed away on the train, entrusting Mario with a diary that, if opened, will cause the ghost to suddenly appear on screen and inflict a game over. As we make our way to the end of the game, finally we have the titular 1000-year door, as, according to in-game legend, was created for the purpose of imprisoning a horrifying demon. This is the revealed reason antagonist Grotus wants to collect the crystal stars before Mario, to gain access and conquer the beast for himself. The demon was reportedly so catastrophic that it actually destroyed the old rogue port that the current one sits on top of, and took the lives of 4 heroes, a Toad, a Goomba, Koopa, and Boo that stood against the threat 1 millennium ago. And they're actually the 4 that were transformed into the aforementioned Black Chest Spirits. Through Grotus' meddling, this now unsealed demon the heroes once fought against is named the Shadow Queen. She's still alive, and is now pitted against Mario for the game's final battle. Stakes here are higher than ever before, having one shot at the other main antagonist, and considering her previous act of malice 1000 years ago. Beyond this context, she's quite intimidating in battle by first using Peach as a vessel, again possession, to fight no holds barred. Her attacks are some of the strongest in-game, with the most powerful utilizing dead hands that rise from the ground and pull Mario under. These same hands can also be used to pull audience members under to heal herself like Hooktail and Cortez, while her standard hands have ability to drain life force. The Shadow Queen is also stated by Grifty to be responsible for the Pit of 100 Trials, a monster-infested dungeon created to torture those she disliked. All who fell into disfavor were thrown into rot. And with that, that's all I had for today, but before I go I want to mention one last thing. It's not dark by any means, but it can be pretty scary for any unexpected player. A character known as Lucky runs the Happy Lucky Lottery. The player can buy a ticket in hopes of scoring a prize the next day, as the winning number is randomly generated at midnight by the GameCube's internal clock. Lucky is usually a super friendly Bob-omb with a positive attitude, but if the player messes with the clock for any reason, say in order to buy multiple tickets, the game's data will note this, and Lucky will have a meltdown if the player admits they're responsible, to the point of making them think he's going to explode and pretending to shut off the game. This reminds me of Mr. Rossetti's explosive rants from the Animal Crossing series, as that game is entirely based around the GameCube's clock, and if one resets without saving, they're sure to get a mouthful. Mr. Rossetti even pulls the same reset trick, but made worse as he threatens to delete progress. But that concludes dark aspects of 1000-Year Door. That was quite a lot to cover, but would you guess that the next game in the series could have even more to talk about? Hopefully I'll see you next time for Super Paper Mario, the most text-dense Mario game in existence, and one with some pretty twisted plot points. See you for the finale. Aw, look at that adorable squiglet, says this card description in Super Paper Mario. So adorable, under your foot. Welcome to the third and final episode of my dark aspects of Paper Mario. Well, I look now at the Wii's 2007 release.
We would like to play.
This dapper fellow over here on the box is Count Bleck, and he's the villain of this game. He's also a nihilistic murderer that wants everything eradicated from existence. All life in the uni and multiverse, including himself. If you think I am at all exaggerating, meet the focus of today's episode. a tragic character fittingly introduced in the most plot-focused Mario adventure ever made. I will now explain his backstory, using 100% actual lore found in the game through NPC dialogue and heavy story implications. Be warned, this will spoil the main plot and ending. Without further ado, the ancients, through historical tellings, were an intelligent civilization and gifted in the powers of magic, though they lacked physical strength. To make up for this major drawback, the tribe invented thinking tools, a fairy-like creature called pixels, using knowledge from a mysterious book that would later be dubbed the Dark Prognosticus. These pixels were cherished for ability to fortify, and were capable of building worlds that would further spread the ancients' influence. But after 1,000 years of being in control of these entities,
1,000 years of death!
the pixels rebelled by influence of their queen, the very first pixel ever made. The other first 12 pixels helped fight with the ancients against their queen, but unfortunately the uprising resulted in only one single survivor of that tribe. The survivor learned the truth behind pixels. They were born by using the souls of those that had died, the Pixel Queen being the deceased daughter of the ancient that invented pixels. That one surviving ancient took the Dark Prognosticus, so an event like the foretold Pixel War would never happen again. In doing this, he also founded a new group, the Tribe of Darkness. Their goal was to protect humankind and prevent the book from misuse, though descendants of the ancients twisted the real history and wrongfully believed the Tribe of Darkness stole it only to enhance their powers. This generation has since banned the production of any new pixels, in fear of a second rebellion that would ultimately lead to their downfall. This new Tribe of Darkness became very secretive from the rest of the world, and forbade marriage outside of their circle in fear of diluting their sorcerer blood. Normal humans were completely off limits, which is where Bleck comes in. Gradually told in a series of flashbacks at the end of each chapter, it's revealed his backstory. Before he became the Count, his name was Blumiere, and he fell in love with a human woman named Timpani that saved him from a fall from the cliffside. After proposing marriage and agreeing to live far away from the tribe that wants them apart, it's learned that his father made Timpani no longer reside in this world. Thinking Timpani was murdered, but actually had her memory wiped and cursed to, quote, wander through dimensions forever, Blumiere opened the Dark Prognosticus to use for his newfound life philosophy, to actually put into motion his idea that nothing should exist, since everything in the universe is pointless and bleak. Finally, a villain I can get behind. He's had the sole person he's loved taken away from him, so his approach is utterly nihilistic, to destroy all until nothing is left. So what does Count Bleck do to kickstart this plan? Within the first minute we're shown exactly how, as the player is thrown right into a cutscene in which Peach is forcibly being married to Bowser, the Count acting as the unholy wedding's priest. This non-consensual bond forms a world-ending catalyst known as the Chaos Heart, just as predicted in the Dark Prognosticus. With magic force to make her say I do, the union is successful and sets course for complete annihilation. After the Chaos Heart is born into the world, the Void was formed as a result, an ever-growing dimension-eating black hole that appears everywhere in the universe without exception. And I say without exception because this Void also appears in the game's version of Heaven and the Underworld. Not even the afterlife is safe from non-existence. The Count's plan will delete all forms of thought, comprehension, and consciousness from all of being, and as such, the stakes could not be raised any higher than this. Comparable to The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, in which the moon is on a crash course to kill all of Termina's inhabitants, the NPCs reveal how they're preparing for the upcoming apocalypse through their dialogue interactions. Right before facing Bleck at the end of the game, many characters approach their inevitable doom with a mix of fear and surprising earnest in the overworld, some accepting death while others reflecting on what the point of their lives were and whether or not they're happy. It's respectable and quite sad, adding more depth and realism to this time and space the player's trying to save. Surprising too is the fact that we're shown, not simply told, how powerful this Void really is. Sammer's Kingdom, a location we'll talk about later, hosts a Duel of 100 tournament, in which the player must fight 100 challengers in order to meet with the king and claim the treasure needed to counter the dark power of Bleck's Chaos Heart. As I mentioned before, and because this chapter is accessible fairly late into the game, the void is gradually increasing in size and at its largest now. Look at that thing! In an effective display of storytelling, the party is told they must face every opponent before receiving that world's pure heart. Though after floor 20, the void has grown so massive the ground begins to tremble, and each vassal bows their knee to allow Mario to hurry through and make it to the king. This makes for a very tense atmosphere as the normally prideful, in-your-face samurais stop their introductions short, until they halt greetings entirely and simply yell at you to rush toward the final gate. But no matter how quick you are, the player's efforts are fruitless, as eventually a hopeless, manic warrior laughs off the impending doom and flees. Tippy exclaims her fear for the worst, and Sammer's kingdom ceases to be. The player can re-enter this eliminated world to reclaim a pure heart sapped of its power, showing only the vast emptiness that remains. The player must traverse white space with the occasional rubble and collapse, while the bleak music track plays, driving hard what's been lost. This is emotionally impactful. The entire setup and payoff for Chapter 6 is an example of how to make an audience care for what they're doing. This act of showing us the aftermath was a brilliant move and one of the most memorable narrative moments in Mario's history for those that have experienced it. Mimi, a servant of Count Bleck, has helped initiate this apocalypse by stalling time. One of several the man's gathered and wrongfully told this is all necessary to build a new, better world upon destroying the current one. However, as we learned from his monologue, the true plan from the beginning was really to obliterate himself and everything. Dimentio, the real final boss of the game, actually knew of this and planned to betray the tormented Count when the pure hearts were used up by Mario's team to fight him. The good part about all this is that even after a defeated, regretful Count wants Mario to put an end to him, Mario's pixel companion throughout the quest helps Blumiere come to his senses. Through slow build-up throughout the past several chapters, it's revealed that Tippy is actually Timpani, transformed into a pixel by Merlin as a last-ditch effort when he found the woman barely alive. Note that, as stated way back, pixels are created with the souls of the dead. As the two are finally reunited again, they move quickly to the altar used at the beginning of the game, exchange love vows with one another, and vanish, leaving behind a restored pure heart, the embodiment of love, to null the Chaos Heart. Nobody in-game knows where they really went, and Natasha, Bleck's closest assistant, also revealed to have been in love with him, albeit one-sided, believes them to be alive somewhere. The credits roll, and afterwards, a picture of Timpani as a human with Blumiere appears on screen. This was the place they promised to find in the flashbacks that would accept their love. It's very touching, and whether this is the afterlife or not, Bleck did say it would cause both their demise. It's reassuring that their souls are together again at peace. Count Bleck's previous dedication in wanting life to end is extremely depressing and makes for a heart-rending end, with a surprising moral that Nintendo would advocate for, as this man, who remember did murder his own father and tribe, is deserving of happiness, redemption, and Timpani's acceptance. Additionally, his main theme is derived from the melancholy memory track that plays during the cutscenes revealing his past with Timpani and their eventual reunion. It's a perfectly touching tie-in that only accentuates the story, and whether you like that sort of plot telling or not, it's no doubt the writers really tried to construct a universe away from the typical Mario game and expand on every detail. Super Paper Mario has possibly the most external lore to find in any game of the franchise, meaning aside from the main plot, veering off and speaking to characters like Garson, the milk bar owner, and his flop-side counterpart Carson, the coffee barista, reveals so much more world-building information that connects everything I've been speaking about. In fact, they provided most of the filling in the blanks about pixels I first discussed in the video. Continuing this world building, we have the Pit of 100 Trials, a multi-layered dungeon in the previous game, and a series of rooms designed for torture. In this sequel, there are 2 descending pits, and, according to those 2 gossipers, one was used by the ancients to research the power of the pure hearts, while the other was simply to study the powers of darkness. Their experiments involved all sorts of nasty enemies from throughout the game's worlds, explaining why they occupy each floor, with 2 boss monsters housed at the basements of each pit. This includes an upgraded mechanical dragon to the one fought early on in the game, and Shadow, a shape-shifting demon that acts as the final challenge to this side quest. The duplicator states to work for its own cursed powers, and reveals that it asks the main cast to complete the pit a second time, simply as a way to study and clone their character. Its goal was to perfectly replicate and replace the heroes to seek revenge on the ancients. An interesting bit of story that adds to the overarching one. Both it and Ractail had a hatred for their creators. But just what is Shadow? These tidbits of lore add a lot of intrigue to the game's history, with the mysteries of these ancients the game brings up so much. Shadow's origin is left vague enough to investigate further, but satisfies curiosity and is worth talking about because the developers cared enough to craft this world and constantly reference in-game events. Transferring to my segment of hidden sexual themes within the game, and for a little break from the darker topics, we have another tale from Garson. This time gossiping about the ancients and their supposed passion for love. Sorry, I meant hot, burning passion, capitalized. He even whispers about an ancient sage the player meets early on, Merlimina, and her particularly spicy love life. So, if all the ancients were so passionate about love, and Merlimina was the most promiscuous, just what is she romantically competing against? Well, if you remember the Samur Kingdom and its 100 soldiers, these fighters are said to be the children of King Samur and Merlimina's younger sister. If her sister gave birth to 100 kids, and Merlimina is the one with a spicy love life, we can get a glimpse of just how passionate this tribe really was. Take that in for a minute. Speaking of, Garson goes on to say, the 100 princes and their royal parents ushered in a new era of prosperity. Imagine all the budding romances with 100 strapping princes around. My goodness, who would have expected that kind of dialogue and topic from this series? Moving forward, additional sexual references include Dementio calling Luigi's mustache a shag to insult him. This was censored in the PAL region because in Great Britain, shag is slang for sex. Mimi also dreams of pools filled with hunky lifeguards, revealed by Dementio upon reading her diary. Embarrassed, she transforms into Bowser, a reference to the first game in which Peach must read his diary to learn where Mario has to travel next. While on the topic of Mimi, and like Shadow, Garson brings up the important question of what exactly she is. Both offers of an answer involve her being a failed experiment of sorts, whether it be an attempt at creating a new pixel, or a witch's unintended brewing. A potion with mimicking properties would explain her ability, and may give reason for her terrifying true form. That's right, as hinted by Tippy, this is not the real Mimi. Undergoing a horrific transformation, wow, more like Majora's Mask than I thought, in which her neck audibly snaps and head rotates around. It uncomfortably stops upside down where spider legs sprout out from where her neck was to become this beast. A deranged laugh using her name is accompanied by a purple jagged text box, usually reserved for the series' most sinister villains, where it then proceeds to chase you around in its first appearance, throughout a maze where it will warp and try to catch up to you. Nerve-wracking and classically scary, being a creepy crawler, paired with her innocent girl-to-gag-inducing metamorphosis. This provides some of the game's greater nightmare fuel. And if you think we're done, before moving away from Mimi, it's also worth mentioning her prominence before this as a ringleader, enslaving Mario and Peach by locking them in a mansion and forcing them to pay off a massive debt for breaking an inexpensive vase. The slavery theme is played up heavily here, with those that thought were going to Merle's mansion for a charm, instead being tricked into the same position Mario's in as a prisoner, but in worse shape than him. These unfortunate souls are bound by ball and chains and served by direction of these whip-wielding Akpows. Clearly inspired by ancient Egypt labor systems, it's certainly an unexpected direction to interact with and work as a peasant in inhumane circumstances. Moving away from enslavement and getting back to what I mentioned about this game's afterlife, there is frequent talk of death in this game. Death itself is usually always spoken of with the pretty clever euphemism game over, as in, that character lost his last life without any extra chances. For the team at Super Paper Mario to write in game overs as an actual story consequence is incredible, and something I hope to see revisited in a future Mario RPG. In October of 2017, Nintendo Life uploaded Super Mario Odyssey, 11 hilariously bad reviews where the host Alex reads some unfair user reviews of the game on Metacritic. About 1/3 into the video we get this pretty funny bit.
I thought when I first started it, it was meant to be some kind of afterlife that Mario had died and had to fight his way back to life. I was disappointed immediately. Yes, that's one thing that I've always felt is missing from Mario as a whole, and the fact that it's not Dante's Inferno.
But believe it or not, Chapter 7 of Super Paper Mario actually is. Dante's Inferno is the first of a 3-part poem entitled The Divine Comedy, following the author's journey through the afterlife guided by an ancient Roman poet as they descend into the depths of hell. But before I continue with that, welcome back everyone! In the last video I focused mainly on the tragedy of Count Bleck, but finished off with mention that death is alluded to quite often throughout this adventure. In the classic side-scrolling Mario games, the character has a finite number of lives. Lose them all and the player is booted back to the title screen with a loss of progress. It's meant to symbolize final death, when all chances are used up and the villain wins. So it was clever for Super Paper Mario, being a hybrid of both that original style and a story RPG, to have game overs actually refer to a character's afterlife, and to show us exactly what that looks like. Because in this game, Mario dies, or so the player thinks at the time, as part of the story in a scripted event. Dimentio traps the hero in an inescapable block prison and snaps his fingers to ignite explosions from within the box. To the sheer horror of everyone watching, our man in red is sent to a form of purgatory in which anyone who's passed on can have the sins of their souls weighed. This plane of existence is humorously known as the underwear, to serve as a determiner for whether or not that person can ascend to the over there, parallel to heaven in the real world. As stated in my Mythology and Nintendo Games video, there is heavy inspiration from biblical and Greek myth. To quote myself, the underwear is comparable to the asphodel meadows of Greek mythology, as its inhabitants only feel suffering through boredom rather than agony. The Asphodel Meadows itself is a melancholic place where people that lived their lives as neither good nor evil are sent. Since this is the majority of humankind, these fields are crowded and sad, as the gathered souls wander for eternity without purpose. Traveling through this place in-game, you'll meet Carrold, existing as a name corruption of Charon, the guide that ferries souls across the river Arheron. Carrold acts as a guide here for Mario across the river Twigs, Greek counterpart being river Styx. Furthermore, Jades replaces Hades as ruler of the underworld, with D-Mans serving her. There's even an incarnation of Lucifer, known as Satan after his betrayal to God, in the form of Bone Chill, a horrifying 6-winged beast. Instead of attacking with fire, as one would normally associate with the devil, he uses freezing attacks. Getting back to my point about Dante's Inferno, this alludes to the narrative via his waist-high ice prison in Cocytus, the 9th and deepest circle of hell, existing to punish treachery. It is ice instead of fire, and the story's explanation for this is those who denied God's love are condemned furthest away from his warmth, the sun which he created. If I've convinced you yet that these interpretations of an afterlife are similar, this makes for some unfortunate fates of this series' cast of characters. What do I mean? Well, Dante's Hell is divided by 9 circles with increasing intensity the closer you get to the core, where Satan himself is incarcerated for all of time. These circles are separated by sin. For example, gluttony, where the self-indulgent wallow in a putrid slush produced by foul, icy rain, while the great worm uses his claws to maul and peel off your skin. This idea is further subdivided by the degree of an individual's guilt, in other words, how indulgent of that sin they were while living. In a section of the 8th circle, fraud, fortune tellers are punished via their heads being permanently contorted by having them physically twisted around their bodies. This is because they tried to see into God's future, an attempt at usurping him, so they now have to spend eternity not even being able to see in front of themselves. Fortune tellers and sorcerers are extremely important NPCs in the first 3 Paper Mario games, so think of what destiny awaits them in this afterlife next time you want to support their business.
Piso's begun! Abracadabra!
Joseph! My back!
This also means that the little girl in Flipside that wants to be a fortune teller is already a damned soul. Getting back on track, the player must travel from the underworld to the over there. But before stepping foot on sacred ground, Underchomps attempt to stop the player from leaving the land of the dead. This is like Cerberus, the three-headed hellhound guarding the gates of Hades. Bone Chill's defeat in the over there by Mario's team is also most likely based on the Book of Revelation's War in Heaven, as the boss is stated to be a fallen NIMBY, what an angel's called in this game, and escapes to heaven during the event of an apocalypse, the Void. Bone Chill's prison can also resemble the dark abyss Tartarus, a place in the underworld where unholy souls are sent for divine punishment. Even 666 is quite probably referenced in one of Guardian Dorguy's questions. This could be a coincidence, but the writers were most likely thinking about the number of the beast, considering the classically unlucky number 13 follows right after. A bit unrelated, but Super Paper Mario utilizes lots of digitized abstract shapes. This also works for the background environments and skies. Something I found really neat for this world in particular was the utilization of family trees. That is a pretty cool touch, honoring the theme of death by stretching to lineage and ancestry. So with all this said, and while it's a really neat idea to have an underworld level, is there anything really scary here? The answer is a resounding yes. Specifically the River Twig's bed, which is required to access as part of the story. One resident expresses concern for those that have fallen in and never surface, asking what happens if someone who's already dead dies. Submerging oneself in this unholy water and sinking to the bottom is even more nightmarish than 100 spider memes, as disembodied hands slowly circulate and chase Mario. They can't be defeated, and have a sole intent of pulling you deeper in the depths of this hellscape. Am I exaggerating? Of course, but listen to this quote-unquote music. The thought of what's happening on screen and listening to whatever that was is inarguably terrifying. Moving on, this is not in the final release and only found within the game's files, but we have an enemy named Kamikaze Goomba. Just the fact that this was considered in the game is shocking, because they, by name and black color scheme, would have probably exploded upon touching the player. But bombs don't make an appearance in this game, so is this Bowser's answer to the overpopulating baby booming Goombas? Oh, that's right, most of his minions are brainwashed in this game. I blame Count Bleck then, as commander for this dastardly tactic. Seriously though, it's no wonder why this was cut. Following the Japanese way of the warrior, honor until death won't exactly translate well into a kid's game overseas. Surprisingly, this is not even the first time Kamikaze has been used as an enemy name. Remember the Koopa Troopas with color-changing shells in Super Mario World? Yep, in the official translation they're named Kamikaze Koopas, and become one when a yellow Koopa re-enters an empty shell. They're named this probably because once they're flashing they can't escape their fate, and hone in on Mario even if it means death by bottomless pit. Green-shelled Koopas do walk off ledges anyway, but my guess is that they just don't know any better. Poor things. War themes don't end there, and unlike Kamikaze Goombas, there's still quite a bit in Super's final release. Prince Crocus of the Floral Sapien Kingdom was said to have wilted suddenly in the year 444. The number 4 in Japan, if you're not aware, is very superstitious and often avoided, as it can be pronounced as she, the word for death. His father's spirit was crushed upon his son's passing, and was overthrown by his own military, where he too met his demise at their hands. The land of Kragnons, home to these cavemen-like people and the aforementioned Floral Sapiens, a species they are at war with, is the focus of Chapter 5, and ends politically when Mario and co. defeat the current crazed Floral King. He's seemingly the cause of war against these innocent Pablo Picasso-designed characters, because of his decree to kidnap and brainwash them, though only until after the monarch is wilted, dead in the language of these flower citizens. By your party's hand is it revealed the reason he called for their enslavement in the first place, to protect against the Kragnons polluting the rivers and simply making his own kind sick. Poisonous waters were the cause of King Crocus acting so strangely. So it was the Kragnons' environmentally poor decision making that initially got them in this mess. To be fair, they are really, really stupid. More seriously again, and going back to the main villain cast, O'Chunks has an especially tragic backstory revealed by Carson. And no, it's not O'Chunks' parents naming him O'Chunks. This man was a general of 1,000 men before serving Count Bleck, and once navigated them successfully into enemy territory in the midst of war. Unfortunately though, through betrayal of one of his trusted advisors, he lost all of his men. Feeling immense guilt and pain for his now failed leadership, Bleck was able to step in and have O'Chunks pledge loyalty by making the general feel worse until he submitted oath. Easing up a bit again, I'm now going to mention a creature relevant to all Paper Mario games I've been saving up until now. A blue, mole-like animal simply named Wacka. When hit on the head, they secrete a rare and nutritious Wacka Bump. Because of this, according to Russ T in the N64 version, this treat is so sought after that Wackas have become an endangered species. One of them is able to be uncovered by the player, and when hit too many times, disappears forever. This NPC is capable of perfect human speech, but becomes less and less understandable the more times it's smacked. Pauses in speaking patterns, faded memory. The player is entirely aware the numbers of this creature have dwindled, and even if they stop before that final hit, they've already inflicted severe brain damage. According to Wonky and Thousand Year Door, there is only one Wacka left in the game's world. The catch card information in Super says that they're on the verge of extinction. And like the original, Mario can keep abusing the little guy for Wacka Bumps until it's gone for good. Congratulations, you've made an endangered species extinct. In Super Paper Mario, there's one last encounter with a Wacka, downtown of Crag. If killed off for good, a female Kragnon named Norite appears, revealing depression at the loss of her friend. Though her favorite snack is Wacka Bumps, so maybe she's not innocent and in fact helped you rid the world of this poor soul. Remember, Kragnons are really dumb. Keeping legacy of this blue groundhog is a samurai using the name Wrath of Wacka. He claims to avenge the smitten Wackas of the dimensions, which is, if you played all 3 games and eliminated that world's only Wacka, referring to you. While still on the topic of the samurais, there's also Staggering Dizzy Fuzzy, a name referencing the well-known hallucinogenic feeling level in Yoshi's Island named Touch Fuzzy Get Dizzy. This classic course has a gimmick that, if coming into contact with these spores, will cause Yoshi's pupils to become dilated. The screen will become visually distorted with a twisting, wavy effect and flashing rainbow colors. Since Yoshi's movement is also disoriented, and the enemy class that only these fuzzies fall under is called Dude, I'm Freaking Out on This, it's clearly inspiration, so it's always funny to see Nintendo calling back to something that's so blatantly adult. The only other drug-like theme in the game, which could be a coincidence, is the floral sapiens and their personality. They act like traditional hippies and can be seen as flower children, a term derived from a group gathering mainly in San Francisco during the 1960s Summer of Love phenomenon. Cannabis and LSD were commonly used during this and other hippie movements of the time, and the term has had a connotation with drugs since. And finally, there's now one last samurai I want to talk about, and the last aspect I'll be discussing today, Bullet Bull. Before battling, he claims that brown is the next generation, a dig at Nintendo's competitors that focus only on realistic visuals that can consist of a drab color palette. Bullet Bull also speaks of the contrary being entirely childish, which is probably poking fun at itself in response to common perception that Nintendo is too kid-friendly. Thank you all for watching this 3-part series of videos. I love this game. I love it so much, and having the chance to talk about some of its more weighty subjects is really important to me. I was really affected positively by them. If there is anything that stood out to you on a personal level, let me know. I'd like to talk about it, and I hope you'll continue to support the series.